Knowing how to shuffle your Pokemon deck is quite the ordeal. Not only is it hard to shuffle when you're new to a TCG, but making sure that you're doing a legal shuffle every time you shuffle can be tricky. Let me give you some pointers. First of all, pile shuffling isn't a legal way to shuffle a deck. While in theory you are randomizing your deck and it's easy enough that anyone can do it, it is also an easy way to stack your deck, especially if you don't combine it with any other shuffling techniques afterwards. The fact that it is a slow technique and takes a lot of time to do one shuffle means it's better to go straight into learning the best technique instead of messing around with a pile. And the best technique is, it's not bridging. Though flashy and fun, it alone does not qualify as a good random shuffle. Aside from the fact that 1. I cannot bridge shuffle, and 2. Bridge shuffling over time can permanently damage your cards, it is also not an effective randomizer, as the top and bottom cards of your deck remain in the relatively same position throughout the shuffle process. The best way to shuffle, though, is called a mass shuffle. Now, there is actually a lot of nuance to this technique, and I'll be honest, how I do it is scuffed and not perfect. The best way to mass shuffle is to hold the deck in one hand with the bottoms facing down and away from both you and your opponent. Then you take the bottom half of the deck and shuffle it into the top half, holding the deck loosely so you don't have to force the sleeves together. You should put the corner of one half of the deck into the sides of the other. But if you want to do the scuffed way like me, which is shuffling the top half of the deck into the bottom half, you must make sure you're always shuffling the bottom part of the deck. Shuffling only the top half of the deck makes it an illegal shuffle, as the top cards will remain in the top half of the deck, while the bottom cards will remain in the bottom half, effectively not randomizing the deck. The Pokemon TCG has 5 status effects that can affect your active Pokemon. It is important to note that status effects go away when the Pokemon is switched to the bench or evolves. Here's how each condition works currently in the Pokemon meta. First up is Burn and Poison. Both of these conditions are denoted with a status market and can stack with each other, as well as one of the other status conditions I will mention later in this video. Burn and Poison both activate between turns, after a Pokemon attack and before the next player draws a card to start their turn. Burn does 20 damage between turns, and the player whose Pokemon is affected by Burn will flip a coin. If heads, they are cured of Burn. Poison does 10 damage between turns and does not go away unless you evolve or switch to the bench. When you are burned or poisoned, there are no restrictions on retreating. The other 3 conditions rotate your active Pokemon and cannot stack with each other. Paralysis turns the Pokemon to the right and it cannot retreat or attack during your opponent's turn, and it goes away once the affected player's turn ends. Confusion makes the Pokemon turn 180 degrees facing your opponent with no restrictions on retreating. But if you try to attack, you must flip a coin. If tails, the attack fails and you do 30 damage to yourself. The last status is Sleep, which rotates your Pokemon to the left. A sleeping Pokemon cannot retreat or attack, but between turns, you flip a coin, and if heads, your Pokemon wakes up. When you're setting up your board with cards like Nest Ball, Buddy Buddy Poffin, or heavens forbid Precious Trolley, how many Pokemon do you put onto your bench? High-level players will almost always have an answer for the first 4 slots of their bench. Most decks typically want 2 attackers out at all times, the one they are attacking with and the one on the bench they are developing. Then, you'll want to fill out your support lines, which typically take up the remaining slots of the bench. But should you fill up all 5 slots? Well, the smartest players tend to leave at least one spot open and flexible, especially if they run a deck full of basic tech cards. Filling your bench up to 5 tends to be okay in early games, especially if you have a clear idea of what your game plan should be. But being aware of your bench in the mid to late game and making sure you have an open spot could save your booty. It's also a good idea to withhold playing basic support or tech Pokemon until you are planning to use them, since they can otherwise become targets of Gust KOs or Gust stalls. So next time, think a little before blinding playing that Nest Ball. Do you really want to fill up that last slot on your bench, or do you just want to check your deck? Winning in the Pokemon TCG seems simple. Take all of your prize cards and you won! But then you remember there are 2 additional win conditions to be aware of. If you knock out all of your opponent's Pokemon on the field, you win. If your opponent starts their turn and cannot draw cards from their deck, you win! However, pro players know that there's a secret 4th option to win, running your opponent out of resources. Whether it's running them out of recovery cards or forcing your opponent to switch one too many times, winning by out-resourcing your opponent, shows definite mastery of your deck and game knowledge. There's a couple of ways to achieve this. First of all, putting pressure on your opponent's resources. This can be an opportunistic route, as an unfortunate Professor Research or Ultra Ball early may force your opponent to sack key tech cards needed in the late game. Keeping track of what cards they've had to sack will better inform you of when you can correctly apply pressure with a key KO or gust to potentially force your opponent to concede. Being aware of key components in your opponent's game plan and putting pressure by continuously KOing a key support Pokemon or using a Pokemon like Toedscruel to shut off key components of their game plan are other ways to control the resource game. Of course, you don't always know the exact situation your opponent is in, and if you need to buy time, sometimes you have to gamble with a targeted gust or kill, hoping they don't have the resource in hand or deck to deal with the situation. And well, that doesn't always work out. But being aware of the board state, especially in the late game where one more KO could take the game for either player, could potentially inform you of another way to win the game. As a regular Pokemon TCG player, you actually need quite a few things to play at any event or play and trade. What are these things? Well, first of all, you need a deck of 60 cards, and make sure they're all sleeved and have extras of the same sleeve on hand. Sleeves are great because they typically shuffle better than raw cards and protect your cards. They also hide any imperfection on your cards that could otherwise be telltale signs and give you a marked card. Of course, sleeves get general wear and tear as well, so having fresh extras on hand to swap out any crusty old sleeve that gets marked up is a wise idea. Next, you need dice. Some players prefer just mark damage with them, but I also like using clear dice for my coin flips. You'll also need poison and burn markers, or some way to denote them in your kit. Optionally, get coins or other markers to mark abilities on your board. Make sure you have deck boxes as well. It protects your cards and sleeves and makes it easier to pull your deck out of wherever you're storing it. An additional option is a playmat. Getting a playmat is nice because it provides an extra layer of protection for your cards, as well as making it easier to pick up your cards from play. Finally, while you could carry all this in your hands, it's much easier to put them all into some kind of bag. And that's everything you need for your Pokemon night out. Of course, the best part of these accessories is the fact that you can customize them to your taste and bring a little bit of your own personality to the board. What's your favorite part of your Pokemon kit? How you visually display information on the board should be clear, because both you and your opponent need to clearly know what is going on. Stacking cards like this is concealing information from both you and your opponent and could easily be seen as cheating in certain situations, and in general is just poor play. There's several valid ways to play your board state though, but in general, keep in mind that the way you make your board state should be clear to both you and your opponent. My preferred way is to stack energies ascending behind my Pokemon cards with tools on the right hand side. Some players will have energies on the bottom of their Pokemon or include their tools in their stacked energies. Whatever it is, make sure to fully display what is attached to your Pokemon. The only cards that are valid to stack directly on top of each other is Pokemon evolutions, since you almost never use anything underneath the fully evolved Pokemon. Even then, there are situations where you have to reveal how much HP a previous stage has in the face of a card like Technical Machine Devolution.